Chapter 14. The roof is on fire. The future of the planet. But how can I feel the burning of a match when I am being held in the arms of the sun? Elizabeth Smart. By Grand Central Station, I sat down and wept. Are you feeling overwhelmed and out of control when it comes to the sheer volume of information we are fed about the bad things happening in the world today? These are things we have very little actual personal control over, such as climate change, biodiversity loss, ocean plastic, and the dangers facing the natural world, as well as famine and war. Most reasonable people do not want these things in their lives, but the governments we elect continue to perpetuate them, such as by subsidising the fossil fuel industry. The economic impacts of a changed climate are already here, and are going to get worse, which will lead to parts of the world becoming completely uninhabitable and uninsurable. What happens when an entire city is not able to be insured? The financial systems of the world are built on assurance of value and of return, not on tipping points of failure that are one-way doors. Surely, then, there must be some reasoning that the way we have always done things is the antithesis of how they should be done from now on. And yet there appears to be such resistance and pushback from the leadership in government and boardrooms around the world. Nearly all boards I know have a risk subcommittee, and surely these committees must discuss the climate emergency. Yet, as I mentioned in Chapter 2, fewer than 3% of Australian company directors have a STEM background. When the future is at stake, surely we need people who are scientifically literate leading the charge. We also need more people with PhDs, who speak the language of statistics, innovative thinking and problem solving on company boards, perhaps mandated through quotas. Diversity of thinking and innovation are two sides of the same coin. If there is one area in which we need businesses to recognise the imminent issues and deal with some serious innovation or mitigation, it is with regard to the climate emergency. Eco-anxiety and education. If you have been frustrated by media reporting on the science of climate change, please feel welcome to join the club. There's even a new term to describe our feelings of helplessness with regard to the obfuscation, misdirection, fakery, false commentary, and opinion taken as fact. Eco-anxiety. A similar term exists in German, Weltschmerz, a word dating back to 1827 that literally translates as world hurt, which encompasses a genuine ennui and sentimental pessimism about the world. The slow drip of worry has become a tsunami of panic. Young people are starting to make their feelings heard, with some even looking at legal avenues to protect themselves and their futures. As the adage goes, we don't inherit the planet from our parents, we borrow it from our children. But like a messed up library book, we have dog-eared the corners, spilled coffee on it, and forgotten to renew it. We have been found wanting, and it is up to us to get our collective act together and make the changes we can while we can. Where should we start? The first place is actually to get educated via reputable academic sources in climate science and to start thinking like systems engineers. There has been no fundamental change to climate physics since the year I was born, 1979, and so there is no debate to be had around the mechanisms of climate. Despite this, there are still those who would disagree and argue about science that they barely understand, and this says more to me about trust and the lack thereof of science and evidence from some elements of society. Climate emergency is a term that evolved from climate change. It began gathering pace and grabbing headlines at the end of 2019, when it seemed as though half of Australia was on fire. Then the COVID-19 pandemic took over the globe and took all news media channels with it, and no one wanted to talk about climate change anymore. It was all about the pandemic and getting life back to normal. But what if normal is not like it was before? Adversity is the mother of invention, and this may be a liminal time and a golden opportunity to press the reset button on how the global economy works and how big business, global, influences politics, local. Thinking back to Malthus and Soloff, who I referenced in the introduction to this book, climate change does still cause friction between people, even friends. It's become so black and white, either you care about climate change or you don't. There is a grey area. People who do care about stopping bad things happening, but also don't think that we as individuals can make any difference, and so they don't keep the climate front of mind when making purchasing or lifestyle decisions. This is a problem, because real change in the world requires change in human behaviour. A cartoon about this that made me laugh just because it was so painfully obvious showed a boardroom full of suits. The person who stood at the front asked the question, "Who wants change?" And everyone raised their hands. Then they asked, "Who wants to change?" And no one raised their hands. Then they asked, "Who wants to lead the change?" And everyone left the room. Climate scientists have now worked out that we can't rebalance the increasing temperature by cutting emissions alone. We actually need to remove carbon from the atmosphere or cool the planet in some other way. So, we are no longer looking at just adaptation strategies. We have mitigation and carbon reduction plans that we need to embark on. Unfortunately, many companies are getting the greenwashing PR machine going. One that made me spit out my tea last week was a soft drink company advertising their bottles as recyclable and pushing for recycling. But fewer than 9% of plastic products that could be recycled actually are. There are stockpiles of plastics waiting for export from Australia and other Western countries to go to overseas recycling facilities. Lots of people get angry about these failings of the reduce, reuse, recycle movement and go so far to say it's merely all talk and no action. I look at the piles of plastic waiting to be recycled and think about all the oil that was drilled out of the ground to produce it and the carbon footprint attached to it. You can't separate messes like ocean plastic pollution from climate change. They are directly connected. A technology-led approach to saving planet Earth. Data oceans and AI-backed modelling software are already being used to develop digital twins of our cityscapes. The ultimate goal in terms of understanding planetary processes would be to create a digital twin of planet Earth. Some researchers are already attempting this, but it needs a coordinated team all working with the same metadata framework. It would be one heck of a neural network or systems engineering approach to create, store, archive and interrogate a digital interface such as this. But, like the Human Genome Project, it will get easier and faster as we get better at it. At university, I was always a bit confused as to why environmental science and marine biology were taught as different degrees with very little crossover. It frustrated me at the time because we all know that there are no hard edges when it comes to Mother Nature. To study rivers is to study estuaries, is to study the water cycle, for example. So maybe we need to teach environmental science via a more systems-led approach. The digitisation of assets such as Earth observation, water quality sampling, and even drone mapping of coral reefs should all be seen as nodes of a complex network rather than information silos. Geoengineering as a solution to climate change has been around for a while, and the biggest problem facing geoengineering with regard to climate change is that it is a planetary-wide endeavour and would affect every living thing here. Some of the carbon-absorbing ideas that have been discussed over the past 15 years and are as yet still to be applied at any appropriate scale include planting trees, dumping lime into the ocean, building chemical sponges or factories to pull gas out of the air, and using iron fertilisation techniques in areas of the ocean that have a low level of iron. Iron is required for plant growth. It seems best to work with Mother Nature when it comes to fast and medium speeds for sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere, but the technology is just not there yet. And there are no easy solutions or guaranteed successes, which means there has been a lack of investment. We rely so heavily on the ocean and are already doing so much damage to it that it doesn't seem right to then turn to it or to developing countries to do our carbon removal dirty work for us while we continue living by the standards that we have become used to. There are, of course, some hyperactive salespeople involved in carbon sequestration. A big push in the late 1990s and 2000s towards biofuels, fuels produced by living organisms such as bioethanol produced by plants, meant that food security in some countries was at risk because the land that would have normally been used to grow food was being prioritised for biofuels. Petroleum companies indulged in a lot of greenwashing, going on and on about the percentage of their fuel that came from biofuels. It's unfortunate that we don't have the level of agricultural education we need for people to realise that many countries around the world are actually facing food security issues in the next decade or two as the carbon is eroded from the soils. It is an unequal game for developing nations, and some governments may be risking the food security of their populations in order to make money from global legislation and subsidies for carbon cap and trade. Alternative fuels such as hydrogen will require huge amounts of infrastructure. In many parts of the world, green hydrogen is now being touted as a carbon-neutral fuel. Green hydrogen is just hydrogen that has been produced by splitting water into its elements, oxygen and hydrogen, using only electricity generated from low-carbon sources, such as wind farms, solar energy or hydropower. This hydrogen can then be stored or transported as a new energy source. It can be simply burnt to create power, among other ways, negating the need for batteries. And hang on, what happened to electric vehicles, EVs? We seem to have jumped straight to the idea of fuel cell vehicles, FCVs, electric vehicles with a fuel cell powered by hydrogen, rather than embracing what EVs can do. Some people believe that FCVs are actually the way we're going to go because EVs' need for batteries is going to make them unsustainable, and EVs are just a stepping stone to something better. Emissions from an FCV are actually just water and oxygen, but people see batteries as much less likely to explode than hydrogen tanks. Remembering the Hindenburg disaster? We will need government incentives, bonuses and financial support in order to transfer away from petrol and diesel engines and actually use new and alternative types of vehicles. Even a few years ago, in cities such as Amsterdam in the Netherlands, you could walk down the streets alongside the canals and see back-to-back Teslas all over the road. This was because the Dutch government and others across the EU provided incentive programs in which you would get money for returning your old car and a bonus and a reduction in cost for accessing an EV. Interestingly, the trams were also electrified. I think the only combustion engine I directly witnessed was the tourist boat that chugged me around the canals for a tour. In the next few years, our petrol stations will start to evolve away from petrol. The next big buzzword when it comes to fuel is e-fuels, electrofuels. These are an emerging area of alternative fuels that could drop straight into the current fuel supply chains and are made by storing energy from renewables as chemical energy. It was only in 2021 that the world finally stopped using leaded petrol. The environmental and human costs of leaded petrol were well known and taken seriously, but it took decades to completely move away from it. The move to unleaded petrol was generally socially accepted because it was so easy. We need to replicate that ease in the transition from traditional internal combustion engines to vehicles that use alternative methods. Shipping and food miles. Shipping is much more significant than the aviation industry in terms of carbon emissions. Carbon emissions from shipping are actually increasing annually towards a predicted level of 17% of total carbon emissions by 2050, and yet we never really consider this to be significant. We don't interact with ships in the way we do with buses or cars or planes. We don't really see them unless they're involved in a crash or a disaster, such as an oil tanker spill or the incident in 2021 of Ever Given getting stuck in the Suez Canal. Innovations in the shipping industry are starting to come online just as questions are being asked about its impacts. In the last few years, we have seen an autonomous carbon-neutral shipping container transport undergoing trials in Norway to see whether or not it could be used as an alternative to the regular shipping vessels on scale. As I discussed in Chapter 7, there have been conversations over the past few decades about food miles, how far the ingredients in your food have travelled to get to your plate. Globalisation of food supply has been a silently evolving thing, and it can be hard to find local produce in the supermarket now. That's another reason attendance at local farmers' markets has increased, especially in affluent areas where the demographic has extra cash and a concern about the climate. No plastic bags to be seen. The key again, though, is scalability and mass acceptance, as well as pricing that is egalitarian to allow all to access it. Current Qantas CEO Alan Joyce has stated that his dream is to have a carbon-negative business as soon as is feasible, including new technology and engineering on aircraft. Qantas has even done landfill-free flights pre-COVID-19 to test the attitudes of passengers and the flexibility of the supply chain. It's really sad that some of the aviation companies that were trying to push the envelope on these changes have been hit so badly by the COVID-19 pandemic that they may not have the money to invest where it will be needed. Something you can do when you're flying is to ensure that your journey is carbon neutral through carbon offsets. Carbon offsets have sometimes been criticised as a great way for a corporation to try to make it look like that business is doing a better job for the environment than they actually are. But I'm a big proponent of people actually trying to do the right thing, even if it's not perfect. The more of us who choose to donate points or money to carbon storage, carbon capture and renewable energy projects, the more those projects get investment. And when those projects get investment, they can scale up. And when they scale up, they can demonstrate how they can be the way forward. Ideas on the fringes now in terms of a carbon negative economy could become normalised over the next 10 years or so. When you look at it in terms of our land mass and the various ways in which we could export the outputs from solar, wind and green hydrogen, Australia could potentially be a battery pack for the whole of the Asia-Pacific region. We could put cables under the sea to pump electricity up to Singapore or Indonesia or across the Pacific Islands. And this could be a game changer in terms of the reduction of carbon emissions from local energy generation. It always surprises and sometimes saddens me that many people who live in island nations don't already have a full suite of renewable energy technologies available and are still so reliant upon diesel-fueled generators. Carbon negative is the new carbon neutral. As we recognise the need to decarbonise our economies, it seems we can't go fast enough to prevent planet-changing levels of carbon in our atmosphere. The climate has changed. Recently, Australia was burning, Siberia was on fire, Canada was ablaze, and California has also taken some heat. The major issue with severe fires is that they then feed atmospheric carbon levels, leading to more extreme events. When the Amazon rainforest had severe fires, everyone worried about the levels of oxygen production necessary for us all to breathe, acutely unaware that up to 80% of our oxygen comes from the oceans. Until the oceans get so hot that they stop producing it, of course. Reef grief, media miscommunication, scientists screaming into the dark. The roof is on fire, and we need someone to call the fire brigade. But, seriously, who are we going to call? Get back in the driver's seat. The climate emergency is becoming such a pressing economic issue that we have to work collectively on seemingly small changes to create large effects. Things you can do include switching energy suppliers, moving your superannuation if your current provider invests in fossil fuels, and being mindful of what you are buying and where from. But remember, we are up against some large industries that still don't fully recognise or pay for the effects that their business models have on climate change. It's time to start holding these companies to account by creating a carbon market that is designed to cancel out climate change. Build it with a core purpose and let it fight eco-anxiety at the same time. My good friend Dr. Jill Hicks was severely injured in the 7/7 bombings in London in 2005, and so, unsurprisingly, her daughter gets anxious whenever she sees terrorism events in the media. Jill gives her daughter one piece of advice that I'm going to pass to you like a torch in the dark. Always look for the people who are helping.